Today, we're really getting into something quite fascinating. It's a relationship, a really complex human relationship that unfolded alongside, well, profound spiritual experiences. We're looking at Sri Ramakrishna and his cousin Haladhari, specifically that 8-year period, roughly 1858 to 66, in Dakshineswar.
And I think it's really valuable here for listeners is getting this ground level view of Sri Ramakrishna. You know, we often hear about the big spiritual heights, but this is about interaction with family, someone who, well, often saw things very differently.
Exactly. It shows the challenges, doesn't it? Even in a life like his.
It really does. And our source for this is an excerpt from the biography, Life of Sri Ramakrishna, the chapter on Haladhari. It's incredibly detailed.
Yeah, it sets the scene so well. Haladhari shows up, needs a job.
Right, looking for employment.
Yeah.
And Mathur, seeing the family link, brings him into the Kali temple.
Yeah.
This is partly because Sri Ramakrishna was in that state, sometimes called divine madness, just completely absorbed.
And Haladhari wasn't just any cousin, was he? He was quite knowledgeable himself.
Oh, absolutely. Well-versed in scriptures, the Bhagavata, Ramayana, Gita, Vedanta, a serious devotee of Vishnu, actually. But he agreed to worship Kali because Mathur asked him to.
Interesting. And right away, there's this difference, this kind of tension almost about food.
Yes, that's a key point early on. Haladhari insisted on cooking his own food down by the Ganges. Mathur even asked him why, pointing out that Sri Ramakrishna and Friday ate the temple offerings.
And Haladhari's reason?
Well, he basically said Sri Ramakrishna was on a different level, highly realized. But for him, Haladhari, still on his own path, it just wouldn't be right. So there's respect there initially, but also a clear boundary based on his own spiritual self-assessment.
Okay, so that difference is there from the start. Let's talk about another early issue, the animal sacrifices. That seems to have been a big sticking point for Haladhari.
A huge one. He found witnessing them deeply, deeply disturbing. And the biography tells this story. After about a month, he's meditating, and he apparently has a vision of Kali herself.
Wow, a direct appearance. What happened in the vision?
Well, according to the account, Kali told him straight up, leave the temple, said his worship was half-hearted, and then even more intensely predicted he'd lose his son soon.
Goodness, that's heavy. And tragically, that prediction came true.
It did, yeah, shortly after. He shared all this with Sri Ramakrishna, the biography says, and then switched his duties. Took up serving Radha Govinda instead.
So a definite shift, driven by this really powerful and obviously painful experience. It really highlights how different their inner worlds were, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Very different paths, even living side by side. Now, things get even more complex when we look at Haladhari's own practices outside the temple duties.
Right. The biography mentions him getting involved with a, quote, degraded cult practicing Madhurapava. Can you unpack that a bit? What's Madhurapava and why was this problematic?
Sure. Madhurapava is a type of devotion, mainly in Vaishnavism, Haladhari's tradition. It's about approaching God with the intense love, like the love between romantic partners. A very high ideal.
Okay.
But this group, the biography suggests, was kind of twisting it, apparently involving secret, illicit relationships with women, not just cultivating that pure inner devotion.
Ah, I see. So a perversion of the concept. And people were hesitant to confront Haladhari about it because of his reputation.
Yeah, there were rumors, but people were apparently afraid of his curses, believed they had real power. That tells you something about the atmosphere,
Definitely. But Sri Ramakrishna wasn't one to just let things slide, was he?
Not at all. Very direct. He heard the rumors and went straight to Haladhari and confronted him about these practices. And Haladhari's reaction, well...
explosive, it sounds like. He got furious.
Absolutely enraged. Reminded Sri Ramakrishna he was the elder cousin, accused him of disrespect. And in that anger, he actually cursed him. Said blood would come out of Sri Ramakrishna's mouth.
Wow. And Sri Ramakrishna tried to explain, but Haladhari wouldn't back down?
Nope. Sri Ramakrishna tried to say he meant well, was just concerned. But Haladhari was incensed, didn't retract the curse.
Okay, this is where it gets really strange, isn't it? The curse, and then what happens next?
It really takes a turn. Soon after this whole confrontation, Sri Ramakrishna starts learning Hatha Yoga from some visiting sadhus, and then suddenly he develops this alarming physical symptom.
Alarming is right. The book describes this irritation in his palate and then actual bleeding, quite profusely.
Yes, Sri Ramakrishna himself described it: dark, thick blood, clotting, hanging from his teeth. Understandably, he was really disturbed.
And Haladhari saw this and immediately thought...
curse, yes. Sri Ramakrishna, apparently quite distressed, even wept and said something like, "See, cousin, what you've done with your curse." It must have been an incredibly intense moment.
Absolutely raw. But then, as often seems to happen in these stories, someone else arrives with a totally different perspective, a sadhu.
Right, perfect timing, you could say.
Yeah.
This visiting sadhu examines Sri Ramakrishna and offers a completely different explanation for the pleading.
Not the curse. What did he think it was?
He believed it was actually a result of the hatha yoga practice.
Yoga causing bleeding? How did that work, according to him?
Well, the sadhu explained that the yoga was opening up Sri Ramakrishna's Sushumna Nadi, that central energy channel in yogic thought. He figured a lot of blood was rushing towards the head because of this opening.
Okay.
And the fact it came out through the palate, rather than building up pressure in the brain, he saw as actually a good thing. It apparently prevented Sri Ramakrishna from going into Jata Samadhi, this very deep, sort of inert trance state that can be hard to come back from.
So what looked like the curse being fulfilled was, in this sadhu's view, a potentially positive side effect of intense spiritual practice. That's quite a reframe.
Exactly. And the sadhu even suggested it meant the Divine Mother had a great mission for Sri Ramakrishna, and this was kind of the body adapting, preventing something worse. It just shows how one event can be seen through totally different lenses, doesn't it? Supernatural curse versus yogic physiology.
Fascinating contrast. Let's shift focus a bit to Haladhari's own background. His Orthodox Brahmin upbringing seems key to understanding his reactions.
Oh, completely. He really struggled, it seems, to square Sri Ramakrishna's often very unconventional behavior with his own traditional views.
Couldn't comprehend the high spiritual states?
Often, no. Like others at the time, he sometimes put it down to a deranged brain, not genuine realization. He was very attached to the rules, the norms, the rituals.
And he'd criticize things Sri Ramakrishna did, like giving up the sacred thread.
Yes, exactly. Things like giving up the thread or sometimes being naked. These were huge deals for an Orthodox Brahmin. Haladhari saw them as serious violations, a blot on Ramakrishna, disrespectful to his heritage. He'd complained to Haide about it.
Complaining is one thing, but didn't he even suggest using force?
He did. Suggested to Friday, Sri Ramakrishna's nephew, that maybe they should force Sri Ramakrishna to be more orthodox. He genuinely seemed to think he knew better and that Sri Ramakrishna was, like, going off the rails.
But his view wasn't always negative, right? There were moments when he seemed convinced otherwise.
Yes, that's what's so interesting, these fluctuations. If Haladhari happened to see Sri Ramakrishna in the Kali temple, just totally lost in devotion, praying intensely, that raw spiritual fervor.
It would shake his skepticism.
Apparently, yes. Seeing something so direct, so powerful, something maybe his books hadn't fully prepared him for, he'd reconsider.
And he'd even ask Friday about his service to Sri Ramakrishna then, like seeking confirmation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Questioning Friday's sincerity, almost as if trying to validate a more positive view he was momentarily having. It's like this constant internal battle, what he was seeing versus his intellectual framework.
Sri Ramakrishna himself noticed this pattern, didn't he? Haladhari saying, okay, now I get it, and then falling back into doubt.
Yeah. Yes. Sri Ramakrishna described it vividly. Haladhari would declare, "Ramakrishna, this time I finally found you out." But then later, confusion would set in again. It really paints a picture of someone wrestling intellectually with something beyond his immediate grasp.
And the biography links this backsliding to his intellectual pride, studying scriptures, taking snuff.
Precisely. That pride, that reliance on his learning would resurface. He'd start dismissing Sri Ramakrishna's direct experiences again. There's that funny bit where Sri Ramakrishna says something like, "What you read in books, I've lived," and Haladhari gets furious, accusing him of pretending to understand these deep philosophies.
A classic clash, book learning versus lived experience. And then there was that incident with the banyan tree that seemed to really solidify Haladhari's negative view for a while.
Ah, yes. That's when Haladhari apparently became convinced Sri Ramakrishna was possessed by Brahmadaitya, a type of ghost, specifically of a learned Brahmin.
What happened?
He saw Sri Ramakrishna sitting naked up in a banyan tree in the Panchavati Grove. For Haladhari, with his strict orthodox mindset, that was just completely beyond the pale. Shocking, inexplicable. It just confirmed his fears about Sri Ramakrishna's mental state, or worse.
And this ties into another major clash, their theological differences, especially about worshipping Kali, Haladhari being a Vaishnava.
Right, devoted to Vishnu. He had real issues with Kali worship. He saw Kali as a Tamasika deity, the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. goodness, passion, inertia, darkness.
Yeah.
Vaishnavas often focus on sattvic deities. Haladhari struggled with worshipping Kali, seeing her as tamasic and therefore, in his view, not really conducive to spiritual progress. He actually asked Sri Ramakrishna point blank how worshipping her could lead to realization.
Ouch. That must have hurt Sri Ramakrishna given his devotion to Kali.
Deeply. The biography says he didn't argue back immediately, but he was really troubled by this disrespect to his divine mother.
So what did he do?
He went straight to the Kali temple, prayed fervently, tears in his eyes, basically asking the mother, "Is Haladhari right? Are you really Tamasika?" And right then, he had this incredible realization.
What was it?
The Divine Mother revealed to him that she's beyond all attributes. She contains all the gunasattva, rajas, and tamasaks, but transcends them all. She's the source of everything.
Wow. A direct clarification from the source, you could say. And he didn't keep it to himself.
Not a chance. He was overwhelmed, ecstatic. He ran to find Haladhari, who was worshipping Radha Govinda. And in this state of intense joy, he actually climbed onto Haladhari's shoulders.
Climbed on his shoulders.
Yeah, repeatedly yelling something like, "Dare you call my mother Tamasika, is she? No, she is everything."
That must have been quite a scene. How did Haladhari react to that?
Well, the biography says it was like a light bulb moment for Haladhari. He suddenly saw the limits of his own rigid thinking, felt his own littleness compared to Sri Ramakrishna's realization. He was apparently so moved, he actually bowed down and offered flowers at Sri Ramakrishna's feet.
A total turnaround. But knowing Haladhari's pattern, did it last?
Sadly, no. Classic Haladhari. Later, when Friday asked him about this sudden change of heart, Haladhari admitted he'd just been completely overwhelmed by the sheer divinity radiating from Sri Ramakrishna in that moment.
Yet it wore off.
As soon as he went back to his books, his scriptures, the intellectual doubts crept back in. It's a perfect example of what Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said, books can sometimes be knots on the heart, intellectual barriers to direct experience.
That's a powerful image. And this tension played out in social customs too, right? Like the incident with the beggar's leftovers.
Yes, another great example. Sri Ramakrishna, really living his Vedantic understanding of oneness, ate a bit of leftover food from some beggars, seeing the divine in them.
And Haladhari, predictably.
Aghast.
Never.
Utterly horrified. His orthodox Brahmin ideas about purity, social hierarchy, it was unthinkable. You start worrying about social fallout, even about the marriage prospects for Sri Ramakrishna's nieces.
Practical concerns colliding with spiritual practice. How did Sri Ramakrishna respond?
He called him out on it, sharply. Pointed out the hypocrisy, really. How could Haladhari talk about Vedanta, about the illusory nature of the world, and then get so worked up about social status and marriage arrangements? He basically asked what good all that scriptural knowledge was if it didn't change how you actually saw and treated people. No mincing words there.
Right. And finally, perhaps the biggest challenge Haladhari posed, questioning the very validity of Sri Ramakrishna's God visions. That must have hit hard.
Oh, profoundly. This was Haladhari using scripture against experience again. He argued, based on his reading, that God is ultimately beyond the mind and senses. So how could Sri Ramakrishna's personal visions be real, valid?
That plunged Sri Ramakrishna into doubt. Serious doubt.
Yes, deep self-doubt, a real crisis. He started questioning if everything he'd experienced, his connection with the Divine Mother, was maybe just delusion. Had he been misled?
That sounds incredibly painful, imagining that level of uncertainty after such intense experiences.
The biography paints a picture of real anguish, tears, prayers, this agonizing fear he might have imagined it all. But then, right in that deep vulnerability, came another vision.
What did he see this time?
He described seeing this rising mist, and out of it emerged a form, a calm, fair face with a flowing beard. This figure looked right at him and said solemnly, "Well, remain on the threshold of relative consciousness."
Remain on the threshold of relative consciousness?
Yes, repeated 3 times. Then the face and mist faded. And this brought immense relief, immense reassurance. It was like an affirmation that his experiences within the world of relative, everyday awareness were valid and significant, not just some lesser state compared to absolute formless consciousness.
So a validation of his path. And this wasn't the only time he got this kind of reassurance when Haladhari pushed him.
No, the biography mentions other times too, often triggered by Haladhari's arguments. Once, the Divine Mother appeared as a known woman, Radhi's mother, near the worship water jar, and said the exact same words. And there was another instance of voice after Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's maybe the story for another deep dive.
Okay.
But the point is, These reassurances came right when Haladhari's intellectual challenges were causing the most doubt. It really shows the intensity of Sri Ramakrishna's inner life and the direct guidance he seemed to receive.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Sri Ramakrishna and Haladhari, 8 years of this dynamic, what are the main takeaways for you?
For me, it's just this incredible interplay. You have direct lived devotion versus intellectual skepticism based on scripture. Haladhari, maybe unintentionally, acted as his constant intellectual spur. His criticisms, his doubts, they pushed Sri Ramakrishna to confront things, articulate them, maybe even deepen his own understanding.
Yeah, he was a foil, wasn't he? And for you, listening or learner of visioning, I think there are some real aha moments here. You see that stark contrast. Haladhari's books versus Sri Ramakrishna's life, it makes them human, shows their paths weren't always easy, even for those closest. And it really highlights how hard it is, maybe impossible, to grasp deep spiritual stuff just with the intellect, right? Without that direct experience.
Absolutely. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it, thinking about Haladhari constantly swinging back and forth, how often do our own fixed beliefs, our reliance on what we think we know from outside, stop us from really getting something profound? Or maybe just different.
What might we be missing by holding on too tight to what we already understand?
Exactly. It's definitely something to chew on long after we finish talking, something to really think about.
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.